Okay. Thank you everyone for taking your time out today to join me on this session regarding digital workspace. My name is John Araman. I'm a portfolio specialist specializing in end user computing. I've been with Nutanix for 5 years. And prior to that, I used to work for Citrix. So I'm coming with a bias towards Citrix, obviously. However, I do cover all end user computing when it comes to this, the region here. I usually like to talk in my presentations more of a storytelling so that it usually sticks more. So if I may, I'll just tell you what the agenda is today. I will quickly go over what do I mean when I say EUC or VDI or DAS, because you tend to hear these words, these buzz terms in the industry, and sometimes even I do that. I'm guilty of doing this. We use them interchangeably. However, I always like to set the definition so that we are all clear and all aware. What do I mean when I say EUC? What do I mean when I say VDI? So we'll start off with that. Then we will talk about the end user computing space and actually how did we end here? Why even do we have the concept of EUC? And then after that, I will jump into the point of why on Nutanix? What makes Nutanix so special? How does Nutanix approach end user computing differently from other platforms? And the bulk of today's discussion is going to be on Nutanix's offering of desktop as a service, which is Xi-Frame. If you have any questions, feel free to either put it in the chat, or you can even interrupt me, whatever works for you. We're not a big group, so you have my full attention. So if we look historically, it's always good to know why we are where we are today. So historically, for those who've been around in the IT industry for long, you'd recognize this traditional setup where you have a laptop or a desktop, and you used to go into the office 9 till 6, 8 till 5, whatever working hours you had. And this was your typical traditional desktop environment. Now, historically speaking, I remember these days, and I wasn't too fond of them. If you think about it, we had lots of challenges with traditional client server computing. So one of the main issues was the difficulty in managing your environment. So if we looked at it, what were the main issues? First of all, we today we still have this. We have so many different hardware vendors. So back in those days, we had to manage different contracts, different support contracts with different vendors. There was obviously a lack of standardization. Some users would have very high-end machines. Some users would have underperforming machines. And you always notice that the users who needed the most power end up not having it. So we had a very inefficient resource utilization. And unfortunately, I would see this a lot, where you have people who really need this computing power or the memory, but somebody else gets that just because, of luck. So all of these issues gave us a really high cost of ownership, from managing all those computers, those physical computers. How are we installing applications? And one of the biggest concerns was, how do we secure our data? One of the biggest issues was, what happens if a laptop gets stolen, or my workstation's hard disk fails? So what if my backup wasn't up to date? How do I make sure that all my machines have all the same software installed? How do I make sure that my antivirus is up to date? So it was really difficult to protect and secure. So these were some of the main issues that helped drive the move towards something called VDI.
It cannot be start till the previous activity can be finished.
Let me just quickly, mute. Yeah, thank you. So what in those days, we looked at what did end users want? How do we address these issues? So what did the users typically want? They wanted to be able to work from anywhere over any device. They just wanted, if I wanted to use one word, they wanted their freedom. They wanted flexibility. Now, people might look at things today and think, oh, be careful what you wish for, because everyone used to say, oh, I wish I could work from home. I wish I could work from the coffee shop. And now last year we were all forced to work from home. So there's the irony over that. Then we looked at what did the organizations want? What did the enterprise want? Basically, they had two main concerns. They wanted to ensure security and compliance. They wanted to make sure that any data was secure. So if a laptop got stolen or compromised, we needed to avoid that and be able to work around it. We wanted to make sure that we could centralize things to lower our cost. Instead of having to manage 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 dispersed workstations, having to deal with multiple vendors, now we wanted to centralize this somehow. So how can we do that? So by centralizing, we would lower the cost. And by doing that, we would be able to also outsource the workload. So you would have easier expansion. So if you needed to, you had a high season, you could always outsource your work to other users very quickly, very easily, instead of having to say, oh, I need to buy 500 new desktops because we have 500 users going to be working over the next 6 months. But then what happens after that workload goes down? So there were lots of things that we needed to address. So what was the solution to this? Basically, end user computing came about, and that's what addressed these issues. Basically, end user computing gave us centralized management, and it also gave us the security, which is inherent. If you look at it in a way, imagine a house with one door and a house with maybe 20 windows or more, which is easier to secure. So with when you have something centralized that you're managing, such as VDI, it's inherently more secure. And at the same time, because we're now giving users virtual desktops, we don't have to worry about what's the endpoint device or what the user's physical device is. Now, remember I said I wanted to talk about what's the difference when I say EUC, VDI, and DAS. This is a typical example where I would mix up and tell people, oh, end user computing. In reality, what we looked at was when we shifted from traditional desktops to virtual desktops is actually VDI. We went from, I shouldn't be using the term EUC. I should actually be saying VDI was a solution that gave us centralized management. It gave us more security and enabled bring your own device. So what are the different definitions? So if I just like to put them in a slide, just as I said, EUC is not VDI and VDI is not DAS. We will talk about different the definitions right now. So anything that touches the users, anything that's related to the end users, that is end user computing for me. Whether it's a VDI, which is a virtual desktop infrastructure, whether it's server-based computing, SBH, whether it's desktop as a service, whether it's the printer management solution, whether it's profile management solution. So whenever people talk EUC, the way I see it is anything that touches the end user, whether even if it's his mobile device management solution, if he has a phone that's given by the company and we are managing it for them, that's how it is. Now, what's the difference between VDI, for example, and server-based computing? VDI, from the term virtual desktop infrastructure, it's typically, and this is the easy way to remember, it's one-to-one. So a single user accessing a single desktop. That's a VDI. And the terms that you would see, the different products in the market, usually you have a Citrix Zen Desktop or VMware Horizon View. Now, the flip side of that was the hosted shared desktops or hosted shared applications approach, which is typically Citrix Zen app, and it's considered server-based computing. The difference between that and VDI, it's usually multiple users accessing a single VM or a single application running on a single VM. That's the key difference. What is desktop as a service compared to those two? It's basically VDI. However, it is being managed it's as a managed service. So you're still one user to one desktop. Now, the only difference is the back plane, all the management side, the license server, the web server, the database, anything that has to be installed to get your environment up and running, that will typically be in the cloud and it is managed. That's the main difference. Whereas VDI, all those components are inside your data center, or today they can be in the cloud. So what are examples of desktop as a service? We have Amazon workspaces, Citrix managed desktops, Windows virtual desktop, and Nutanix's own offering, which is Frame. So now that we've put the definitions aside, we'll go back to the story. So remember, we had a problem with traditional desktops, and VDI was the answer. Well, so we thought. And after users started using VDI, we, quickly realized that VDI wasn't this, faultless solution and everything was, all nice and pretty. EUC, or VDI, it presented its own set of challenges. One of the biggest issue that I've seen over the last 20 years of doing EUC and VDI, whether it was server-based computing or VDI, it is poor user experience. And this is the biggest challenge everyone would see whenever we're talking about VDI. Oh, it's so slow. Oh, the performance is so bad. I don't like my Citrix. I don't like my Horizon. That's what people would say. Whether it's the fault of the application, or whether it's the fault of the infrastructure, whether it's the solution not implemented correctly, it's always the VDI solution that is going to be blamed. That's the biggest challenge. And I'll give you a quick hint how I used to tackle that challenge. VDI projects take a long time. Yes, that was very true. It takes a lot of planning. We needed to do a lot of interviews with the employees, with the different departments. So a typical VDI project from start till implementation, till actual adoption, can take between 6 months to 2 years even. I've seen projects that have been delayed even more than that. Another issue that people weren't aware of with centralization comes high risk. What do I mean by that? In the traditional client-server environments, if one workstation died, hard disk failed, power failed, you affect that particular user. Now with VDI or with server-based computing, you're no longer affecting a single user. If your master image goes down, you're affecting many users, maybe sometimes the entire organization. So that's also a risk that people had to be aware of. So all of this in mind, it added a lot of complexity and raised the cost. So what do we do now? So we thought that VDI was a nice solution. And in fact, it does address a lot of problems. However, it had its own set of problems. So when I first joined Nutanix, I was surprised to learn that Nutanix's initial, I think it was 90% of the first customer base were mainly VDI customers. So we discovered that with Nutanix's hyperconverged infrastructure, with our platform, we can go and give a much better performing environment, and it's scalable, simple, and very fast to use. So turns out that we have VDI. It's in our DNA. You're getting the best platform to run your VDI solution on, and this is why initially the majority of customers were actually VDI customers, and we had a strong partnership with Citrix and VMware, and just trying to see where we can help our customers to get the better experience. So if we think about it, what were the benefits, main benefits? It's excellent end user experience at scale. And the term at scale is very important here. Because in a traditional environment where we used to have the 3-tier architecture, you have your servers, you had your storage, you had your all your components. The biggest bottleneck used to be at the storage. So no matter how many servers you would increase, your storage more or less was your bottleneck, and you would have to plan ahead of time. So if you needed to increase maybe 1,000 more users, you typically had to add more storage, and sometimes your storage, your SAN wouldn't accept that, so you needed to expand or you needed to migrate. So it was a very big issue back then. With Nutanix, with a hyperconverged infrastructure, with our enterprise cloud, that's no longer an issue because each and every Nutanix cluster is expandable and the performance is linear. So if you had 100 users running on one server, physical server, and so we know that 3 servers gives me 300 users, I know that adding 2 more servers will give me 500 users with the same expected experience. Obviously with Nutanix, because we're doing the cloud approach, we're doing simplicity, we're doing ease of use. We don't care, right? Think about it. Do we care what is running, what physical hardware do Google have when they're running my Gmail or Outlook or Microsoft? What hard disks do they have? Or how many IOPS are they able to run on their clusters? We don't care. As long as we have the service, we are able to access our emails. That's what's important to us. So we at Nutanix, we give you that same peace of mind. You get the solution, you're able to run. If a hard disk fails, so what? We just replace it. If a node fails, we don't care. And in environments that are big enough, we can even do a whole, what's it called? A rack failure. So I've deployed solutions where we have rack high availability. So even if you lose not just the disk, not just a server, not just a node, you could lose the entire rack and still be up and running if you've sized your environment correctly. So these are some of the benefits of running VDI on Nutanix. Obviously, it's much faster to deploy. In a typical VDI solution can take, if you're just doing a basic setup, next, a little bit of configuration, you could be up and running within maybe a week or 2 weeks. With Nutanix, you can cut that down to maybe 3 days if all goes well. So as a summary, you have simplicity, you have linear scalability, the performance is always consistent, you have a lot of independence because you're running your own show. You don't have to reach out to the storage team and say, oh, I need a LUN for my VMs or whatnot. You can do things on your own. Obviously, because we're using hyperconverged, you have a reduced footprint. Obviously, again, your return on investment is going to be much better, and you have much less risk. This is what a typical stack of VDI looks like. You will have at the very bottom your hyperconverged solution. You can choose the hypervisor that you prefer, whether it's Hyper-V, ESXi, or our own Acropolis hypervisor. On top of that, whatever VDI or EUC solution you want to run, whether it's Citrix or VMware, and how do you want to store your user files. This is basically at a very high level what a VDI solution looks like on Nutanix. Now, what's the future of VDI? Because obviously, if we don't change, if we don't adapt to the changing future, we will be stuck in first gear and won't be able to advance. So people sat around and thought, I'm thinking 2012, 2010, 2012, what's the future of VDI? What's next? Because if you look at it historically, we had the IBM terminals where you had a keyboard connected with a cable to your terminal, and that's how we had a remote session. And then came server-based computing or remote desktop or Citrix XenApp. And then after that, we moved into the VDI space. So people sat down and thought, what's next? How can we improve VDI? And they came out with the concept of desktop as a service. So instead of me having to go and deploy my VDI solution, how about I make it as a service? So it's an instant start. I just want to be able to click on a button and get my desktop. Why do I have to deploy my license server? Why do I have to worry about the web server or my orchestrator? So all the different components, all the management required to run a VDI solution, I don't want to have this as a worry. I want it to still be very secure, and I want to be able to do a true shift. I'm sure you've heard this over and over again. CapEx to OpEx. We are going from capital expenditure to operational expenditure. But in reality, I've always seen that no matter how we like to tell the story, we end up still going into a CapEx where you have to invest money before you can realize the returns. Whereas in today's world, where we're seeing all these cloud direction, everyone has a cloud first approach. They're moving to the cloud. We prefer the cloud. So why this move? Because we are able to actually shift from CapEx to real OpEx, where you only pay for what you use. Now, one of the key points when we talk about desktop as a service, we want to be able to scale unlimited in the cloud. Now, the key difference when we say desktop as a service from Nutanix, we like to focus on the point of multi-cloud, and I will talk about that in the next slide. So in summary, what is our offering for desktop as a service? We are providing you with a platform that can run Windows applications and desktops on any device with just a web browser. That was the old definition. In the new slides today, we also mentioned the Frame app. Historically, I used to tell people, we don't need a Frame application because you can run on any web browser that supports HTML5. But because Frame got so popular and people were asking for more and more features, and by features, I mean multiple monitors. They wanted to be able to run their webcam. They wanted to be able to run USB storage devices in their VMs. So due to this request, we have developed the Frame app, which gives us more and more functionality, obviously, at the cost of having to install an application, which is not a big deal. All the other VDI solutions in the market require an application. We just had to adopt. And this is the beauty about IT. Obviously, we always adopt to the changes. We adopt to what the users require. Now, remember I mentioned the point that we do true multi-cloud desktop as a service. What do I mean by true multi-cloud? If you remember in the first few slides when I mentioned desktop as a service, we have AWS, Amazon Web Workspace. They provide a desktop solution. However, you're obliged to run it on Amazon. Microsoft, they do have a desktop as a service solution, but you have to run it on Azure. The beauty with Nutanix Frame is you have the freedom of choice. You have the flexibility to choose to run your desktops in Amazon, on Google Cloud, or in Azure. On top of that, you have the choice to even run it inside your own data center. Notice at the very top of the screen, I have my Frame control plane that will remain in the cloud. So this is the part that enables us to provide you a true desktop as a service. You are subscribing to a desktop. Where you choose to run the desktop, it's your choice. You can tell me, I have users in the US, we prefer them to be running on Microsoft Azure. The users in Europe, I want them to be running on AWS. And my teams from Asia, I want them to be running on Google Cloud. And for the Middle East, because we don't have the high speed connections that the other regions have, let us run them on a private cloud on Nutanix hardware, on a Nutanix cluster. So this is true hybrid solution where you can have multiple users running on different clouds and you can manage them through one location. So if I'll just quickly give you a history lesson on where Nutanix came from, I'm going through. Yeah, so it was founded early 2012. And Nikolai, he is also now part of the Nutanix team after the Nutanix acquired Frame. It was designed in the cloud for the cloud. This is the key point I mentioned, because I have my ex-colleagues from Citrix asking me, so what makes Frame so special? I mean, Citrix have been around for way longer, and they're much more mature. And I say 100%, 100%. If you are looking for a full-fledged end-to-end VDI solution where you have access to configure and control all the bells and whistles, definitely a solution such as Citrix, Zen Desktop, ZenApp, those are ideal. However, if you want something that is built for the cloud, if you want the Tesla of cars for VDI, we are looking at something called Frame. So the easiest way I noticed and I discovered to talk about Frame is to show you how easy it is to actually set it up. It's basically a 5-step process. I will go through each one now. Step number 1, you decide, where do I want to run my users? Remember, the infrastructure will always be running in the cloud. This is where the users connect, authenticate, and then once they're there, you will be sent to your desktop. After you've picked your infrastructure, after you've chosen, notice here on the screen, you can choose AWS, Azure, or wherever you want. Next step would be to actually, sorry, I clicked twice. How do you want to authenticate the users? You can use something as simple and basic as a username, password, or you can use Google, or you can use any authentication such as Okta or AD. We use at Nutanix Okta, for example. And then after you've set up the, how do you want to authenticate the users, you choose next tab would be what access do they have? Are they going to be administrators, or are they going to be just a Launchpad user? Once you've set up that, you install your applications. Once you've done the application installation, where do you want your users to install their to store their data? And this is very important. Notice here on the left side of the screen, it's literally a slider box. Do you want to enable Google Drive? Yes. Do you want to enable Dropbox? Yes, no. OneDrive? Yes, no. Historically speaking, when we used to deploy a full on-prem VDI solution such as Citrix, deploying these storage components was actually a challenge. It wasn't that simple, just a slider box. But because Frame was built in the cloud for the cloud, this has been very simplified. And the last step after you've done that is, how do you want to let the users connect? You just need to make sure you have enough desktops, and then you tell your users, connect to this URL. It's as simple as that. Any questions so far about Frame or desktop as a service? Perfect. So the question I get, and I get this very often, is why Frame? Like, why not a VDI solution? And because I actually manage both end user computing, the whole end user computing scene, which is covering VDI and covering desktop as a service, I always tell the customers that it really depends. It's the consulting answer, which is it depends. And it actually depends on what's the use case and what are you looking to get out of your remote connectivity or your work from home solution or whatever you want to call it. So, but when I'm asked why Frame specifically, my first thought, it's very simple. You know, it's literally a one-click setup. There's no real deployment that needs to be done. It's very easy to access. So last year during the lockdown, our Frame deployments, or I shouldn't call it deployment, our Frame subscriptions skyrocketed because we had customers, they just needed a desktop. They wanted to provide their users who are sitting at home, who have a laptop, who have a workstation at home, just somewhere that they can connect and run their corporate applications and access corporate files. So it is a very simple solution. It's very fast. You can onboard people in literally in I wouldn't say minutes, half an hour to 1 hour. You'd have the whole setup done. You installed your applications and people can connect. and you're getting really good performance. Even if your connection isn't the best, you are still getting a very responsive desktop. And the reason behind that is because it is optimized for this. So if you asked me 15, 20 years ago, when I used to do a lot of Citrix deployments, I want to run AutoCAD or Adobe Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator. My recommendation was, for those users, you would need to run a physical workstation. We do not recommend. And then after graphics processing units cards came out, we started saying, yeah, we can do it, but it was also a bit of a challenge. Today with Frame, because it's built and designed for that, it is much faster. And as I said, we give you total flexibility where you get to choose where you want your VMs to be running. You can have them on a public cloud, private cloud, or a mix of both. And because the control plane is always in the cloud, meaning we as Nutanix are upgrading that continuously. You are always getting the latest and greatest platform that you get to run your environment. We have a lot of features for the users. So these are new slides. So for you who've already seen, maybe attended one of my old seminars talking about Frame, these are a lot of the new features that we have, including obviously existing features. We now support multiple monitor support with the Frame application. We can support the human interface devices, like having a joystick or whatever you want to use. You can also now do Frame launch links, where you might have a link, you click on that link, and it will automatically launch you a desktop or an application based on what you want. You have the option, obviously, to disable copy and pasting. You have the option to disable printing or allow the microphone. So these features, again, if you're coming from a strong VDI background, you might tell me, but John, I can see there's only 5, 6, 7 options. Yes, that is very true. However, the goal here is to be simple yet effective. You're getting a solution that you can actually run without having to worry about all the configurations around that. So what is one of the newest things? It is our Frame app, which gives us the ability to have multiple monitors. We now support smart cards. So I got to play around with the smart card reader for the Emirates ID and play around with that and see how that works. So we do provide additional features thanks to the Frame application, and that list of features is growing as we speak. Again, some of the features is you have instant pools, and by pools I mean you have a set of predefined configurations of your desktops. These are available on AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. You have the feature to use whether you want to have persistent or non-persistent desktops. And you have the flexibility, obviously, to customize your VMs based on your requirements. You can also use domain joined or non-domain joined. So these are a full list of features. I'm not going to go through each and every one, but if you do have any questions on that, please feel free to ask. Now, one of the biggest questions I always get, and this is very prominent, especially in this region, is, John, you're telling me you want to run VDI in the cloud. How secure is that? It's the biggest question I get. And I understand where we're coming from when we talk about having corporate data in the cloud. Now, the easiest way for me to explain why I feel confident is that we have Frame running on AWS and Azure government clouds that are in the US. And when I say this, people tell me, well, yeah, but that's for the government and they're in the US. What does that have to do with me? What it does have to do is we are using the same technology, the same platform. The only difference is for those that are running in the gov clouds, you are running them specifically on a special cloud. But the technology, the protocol, the security, the native inbuilt security, that is all the same. The only difference is they have their own cloud, whereas you're using the public cloud. Now, if you want to add that added bit of security, you can run it on your own Nutanix cluster. And as you can see, we have a lot of enterprise-grade compliance, such as SOC 2, Type 1, 2, and SOC 3. We are HIPAA compliant. I used to say we are FedRAMP ready. We are now FedRAMP authorized. So we have lots of security compliance, and we support, obviously, two-factor and multi-factor authentication for added security. As I mentioned earlier, you can control copy, pasting, upload, and downloading of data. So you are getting the full security scale. Again, a bit more of whether or not you want to choose private or public cloud, you are at liberty to choose. The nice thing with the private cloud, it's if you have predictable workloads that's consistent, or if you have a lot of users and you don't want to pay for cloud, you can run things inside your data center. And if you want to have, variable workloads, seasonal workloads, during the school you have lots of students, but then during the summer or during vacations you don't have users. So you can choose whether you want to have private, public, or a hybrid approach. We obviously support multiple operating systems. You can run server OS or Windows 10. Just one thing to keep in mind with Frame, because it's desktop as a service and it's a VDI with subscription, it's always one-to-one. What do I mean by one-to-one? You're running a single user connecting to a single VM. Whether that VM is a Windows 10 or a Windows Server OS, it is always one user to one user. That's the key thing to keep in mind. I think that's about it. Maybe we can have a quick demo. So any questions so far? Let me just check the chat. Feel free to unmute if you have a question. End the slide. So these are some of the cool stuff that we run. So by the way, this demo, this presentation that I was running is actually running on my Frame desktop. That is, and I purposely chose a Frame desktop that's not in Dubai. I'm running this desktop off in, I think it was Frankfurt, Germany. So this is me running, and you're actually seeing my desktop that's running in Germany. This is a Frame desktop. The presentation was running on PowerPoint from the Frame desktop, because it's really hard to demonstrate or demo Frame. At the end of the day, it's simply a desktop. It's a Windows desktop. Now, the things that I will show you, that I can show you, is that you can see the stats. I have a 150 millisecond ping latency from my home to the VM. What else can I show you that would be a little bit interesting? There's nothing really special. It's just a desktop. I will show you the back end side of things in a second. If I do a speed test .NET, I'll just show you. Obviously, this is the data center in Amazon. It's in Frankfurt. It's going to be a fast connection, obviously, that they have in their data center. Yeah. So this is the download speed. We're talking about 1,500 plus, 1,600. It's really interesting to see how it's just a desktop and there's really nothing special. And this is what we want. We want people not to worry about, do they have powerful hardware, or is their hardware using this kind of storage, or are they using SSDs, or are they using a hybrid setup, or are they using, NVRAM? We shouldn't care. All we care about is, do I have a desktop that's working? Can I copy paste files from my local machine? See, I have here uploads and downloads. to my VM? Yes. This is as simple as it gets. There's nothing really special to see. I'm going to just show you what the console side of things looks like. So from an admin side, I showed you very quickly what it looks like. It's a Windows desktop, nothing special. From the back end side of things, this is what you as an administrator would see if you were managing a frame environment. On the right side, notice we don't have that many options. On the right side of the screen, I can easily see that we have a session running, who's the user, and what's the VM that he's connected to. It's a 16 GB memory with 4 vCPUs. Sandbox is the VM where I will actually install all my applications. So notice we have a list of applications that we've already installed. This is how you update and manage. This is, if we like to call it, the golden image or the master VM. We would usually power it on, install applications, and all those changes will be updated to my users. Utility servers, it's basically some VM that we can power on if you need a license server. See, we actually have one done. Or if you want to run, if your application requires some back-end server, this is where you will put it. The launchpads is where we can configure what the user experience looks like. I can choose what background the users will see. We can choose what we want. Do we show them an application or a desktop? This is where we would configure that. The authentication for the users is here. We would choose whether we want to allow basic username and password. Is it Google? Notice most of these things now are grayed out because I'm connected to a desktop that's managed by my colleague. His name is Ruben. You can see he has his own organization. So I don't have all the access to configure this because I'm just connecting as a view-only admin. Capacity is where you can choose how many virtual machines to power on. So if you tell me I have 100 users, but at any given time, we only need 50 VMs because they're working in 2 shifts, you can here select how many instances you want and what's the buffer. If you want to say I have 50, but I want at any given time, 5 VMs are always powered on, ready and waiting to go for the users. So you choose that. And obviously here is where you can select your instance type. So do you want to give the user 2 CPU with 4 GB RAM, 4 CPU with 8 GB RAM, whatever configuration you want? This is where you would see them and choose that. Analytics gives us a quick view to know who's been using the VMs. And this is especially useful if we're doing it in the cloud, because for those who run cloud workloads, you are aware you are paying for the CPU usage, for the memory, for the disk. Even if the VM is powered off, you're still paying for the storage. So it's very good to be able to see what's happening in the usage. How much disk usage do we have per VM? Are we using elasticity, building up more VMs for higher workload times? So you have all this analytics, and you can get session reports to know who's connecting for how long, and you can download those reports. Audit trail is something that we need so that we know who's changing what in the environment. So I can see that Ruben has changed the elasticity settings, so he probably added or removed VMs, whereas Stefan changed the launchpad settings. So the launchpad was that part where you can connect to a desktop or application. Notification just shows us what's happening. The settings is where we typically create and configure stuff. So under the session settings, as you can see, this is where we can choose to enable or disable the Google Drive, Box, Dropbox, OneDrive. It's a slider. You can choose timeout limits. So if a user is connected but not doing anything, after how long do we consider him as inactive, and then we put his session as disconnected. The features that I showed you previously, the clipboard integration, do you want to allow it? Copy pasting, and if yes, do we want to allow copy pasting from the VM to the physical machine, or from the physical machine to the VM? or bidirectional. So we have all these configurations. It's not much. It's honestly, it's not much because it's, again, very nice and simple. What else is there to see? If you have multiple geos, you can create an availability zone so that you know that the users can connect to multiple clusters across the regions. Do you want to enable enterprise profiles, which allows us to give you some sort of persistency to your VM? So if the user saves his data in the My Documents, or he wants to create files, where do we store them if you don't want to use something like Dropbox? So you would be able to enable the profile management and personal drives. They will have somewhere to store their data. You have the choice, like I said, do you want to enable domains? Do you want the domain joined or non-domain joined? So the settings, they're not that much, but they're simple and they get the job done. So as you can see here at the status, I can see what VMs are running, what's the IP address. So these are, in one glance, all the servers, and I can see the active sessions, which typically is here. There's just me and somebody from somewhere else connected. So that's basically it. Any questions regarding the frame or how it's set up? Let me just quickly check the chat because it seems I don't have it open in my screen. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, so someone was asking if Citrix, okay, let me just rephrase the question. So can we run Citrix? Yeah, so someone was asking, can we actually run something like Citrix and Frame together on the same environment? The answer is yes. So if you do have a group of users who need to be running a full-fledged on-prem solution such as Citrix, you can have that running, and you can have for your external workers, your third-party employees, they can be connected over Frame. So you don't have to, pay for a full-fledged VDI license for them. They're seasonal workers. They can connect on, on a need-to basis. Is there anything else you guys would like me to show you? Because that's about it. I mean, it's simple, not much to. It's really nice to actually try it out and see. So this is the admin interface. This is the end user interface. As you can see, it's just a desktop, and you can see all the statistics at the very bottom. Let me see if I want to try. I'll quickly show you what the print job would look like, because I haven't connected to this desktop in a while. I just want to see, will it still see my printer? So if I select print, notice we have the frame printer, and you can have physical printers assigned. So if I click print to the frame printer, what it will actually do is it will discover what printers are available physically from my physical endpoint, and it will be able to print to that device. I have a Xerox, yeah, there you go. I have a Xerox workstation at home, and it will show me that printer. So there's no configuration. I didn't have to install any drivers for my printer. Historically, printing was always a nightmare on VDI, whereas with Frame, we've taken it out of the equation. All you need to do, hit print, see which printer you want to print to, or you want to create a PDF, and then you just hit print, and it's that easy and that simple. So with that, if we don't have any further questions, someone's just joined now. So if we don't have any further questions, I will have the recording sent out to everyone who's joined, and those who weren't able to make it, we will send out the recording. And again, thank you very much for taking the time out of your days to join and see what we had. So I'm going to stop the any last questions before we stop the recording? Someone's asking, do you have app iframe for mobile and tablets? No, the frame app currently runs on Windows machines. I can actually check. This is the first time I get that question. It's a very interesting question. I should ask the guys, but one thing to keep in mind, because we only need an HTML5 browser. So because if you're talking a mobile phone or a tablet, you don't have multiple monitors, you don't have all those requirements that caused us to have the frame app. You only need a HTML, so Chrome browser or Safari or any of those modern browsers running on your mobile or your tablet is enough to get you running on frame. So I've actually used frame on my iPhone and on my iPad very easily, no issues there. Typically, the frame application was developed for the use cases such as multiple monitors, HID devices, like the ID card readers, scanners. Those devices pushed us to create the frame application. But yeah, I will check if we have something in the works. Any other questions? So, yeah, most welcome. Thanks, Ramzi. One thing I would suggest is if you go to the Frame website, you can sign up for a demo account, try it out, see how it goes. You'll actually get a desktop, play around with it. And if you are interested in trying something a bit more, at a larger scale, do reach out to me and I can put you in contact with the right guys or myself to help you start that. It's like I said, it's always nice to actually see it in real life, and it's very simple. So I'm going to stop the recording right now. Thank you again, everyone.